Good afternoon and welcome to our presentation, TPMS Talk, Fundamentals of Fast and Efficient TPMS Service. My name is Maddie Weiner and I'm the editor of Tire Review, as well as the moderator for this event. Today's webinar is sponsored by Schrader TPMS Solutions. Too often, TPMS service might seem complicated, but it doesn't have to be. During this webinar, we'll break down the fundamentals of TPMS service and give you real-life tips for setting up a profit-building TPMS program, just in time for the busy tire-changing season. But first, I'd like to address some housekeeping items. As part of this webinar, we'll do a Q&A session afterwards. Our speakers today will address as many questions as they can during the last portion of the event. Please submit your questions throughout the webinar. To improve the chances of your question being addressed, don't wait until the end of the event to submit them. Ask them as they occur to you. To send in your question, type it into the Ask a Question box and then click the Submit button. This webinar is being recorded and it will be available on demand for you to view. We encourage you to direct coworkers to the recorded presentation. You'll also receive an email with a link to the on-demand version in a few days, and it will also be posted on the brand websites of Tire Review, Tomorrow's Technician, and Shop Owner. Looking at the widget bar at the bottom of your console, you'll see icons that allow you to open and close windows on your screen. When you place your cursor over any of the icons, you'll see the name of the widget. You'll notice there is an icon for Facebook, as well as an icon that lets you send an email to a friend about today's webinar. There is also an option to print a certificate for attending today's webinar. You can access this by clicking the yellow certificate icon. If you need help at any point during the webinar, click the question mark icon for some troubleshooting tips. And finally, if the slides stop advancing, or if you're having problems with your audio, try pressing the F5 key at the top of your keyboard. It will refresh the webinar console on your screen. Now, I'd like to introduce our presenters. We're happy to have Yanick Leduc joining us today. Yanick is the Global Technical Training Team Lead at Schrader TPMS Solutions. His career at Schrader TPMS Solutions began in 2017 when he joined the company as a technical training and support specialist. Since January 2021, he has been leading Schrader's TPMS training team globally. We also have Tom Kirkham joining us today. Tom joined Schrader in 2007 as a technical support hotline specialist and has recently been promoted to technical trainer. He is responsible for Schrader's product training and education through multiple channels and platforms, as well as creating content for Schrader Academy, a free TPMS training platform. Now, let's get started with today's presentation. Yanick, the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. Super excited to give you all the information that you'll need for TPMS. So without any further ado, let's just jump right into it. So this is our agenda for the next hour. We're going to go through some of the introduction of TPMS legislation, but we're also going to go into some of the more crunchy stuff like how to troubleshoot and what is the checklist. We have an awesome checklist for you that is available on our website for you to download. Let me give you all these details right now. So let's start with the TPMS introduction. TPMS, obviously, you guys, I'm sure you already know that today. It means tire pressure monitoring system. It is a mandatory safety system that will notify or give a warning to the driver as soon as one of the tire or more are underinflated. Underinflated by how much? We're going to see that in a few minutes. But, whenever it's underinflated to a point where it's considered unsafe for driving. But so as you know, driving with underinflated tire or even overinflated tire, it's going to end up on wearing out your tires prematurely, and of course, your safety of you and the passengers in your vehicle will be the risk is increased on having potential accident, as you will increase your stopping distance and vehicle handling. And this is not mentioning potential tire blowout as you're driving on the highway. But TPMS is not just about all safety. Of course, you'll have cost effectiveness associated with that. So it is estimated that a tire that is underinflated by 20 to 30% can reduce the tire life expectancy by as much as 25%. So you're ending up on buying tires far more often than you should. And also, TPMS will help on the gas mileage, because a tire that is underinflated by only 6 psi can directly translate into a 2% increase in fuel. So that means about 14 gallons of fuel for someone that can drive for someone driving 25,000 miles a year, as an example. So TPMS, all about safety, but it's also leads to cost saving for you on your tires on your vehicle. On top of that, TPMS was legislated in 2007, and there are some important points for you to remember about that legislation, and Tom is going to give us more info on that aspect.
Okay, so what drives the TPMS system? It was developed. It was developed through the TREAD Act. That was a piece of legislation that required that all cars sold in the United States, 100% of vehicles sold in the United States by 2007, and that was phased in over 3 years. All passenger cars, light trucks, and buses under 10,000 pounds were mandated to have a TPMS system. The requirements of the TPMS system were that they had to monitor all 4 tires, and it had to alert the driver if one or more of those tires was 25% below the placard value, and that would translate to an unsafe driving condition. The system, part of the system's requirements also were that the system had to alert the driver if there was a malfunction. So if one of the sensors isn't communicating, or there's a piece of hardware on the vehicle that's not functioning, you will get a malfunction indicator light that will tell you that this system isn't working correctly. So those are the highlights of the TREAD Act, and we'll go back over to Mr. Yanick for identifying what vehicles actually have TPMS and what vehicles do not, and how you can tell the difference.
Thank you, Tom. Yes, very important, because it is a question that we get a lot on our 1-800 tech support line. So you have 2 cars in your shop. How can you know which one has TPMS and which one doesn't? So there's part of that legislation that Tom just talked about that you can use in order to help you identify which vehicle has TPMS or not. So the vehicle type, TPMS was legislated for these types of vehicle, passenger vehicles that are less than 10,000 pounds. That will exclude the motorbike and the dualies, and also, well, the vehicles that are more than 10,000 pounds are excluded from that legislation. So if you have any of these types of vehicle and a mix of vehicle type along with the vehicle year, any of those vehicles along with the vehicle year. The legislation was phased in. 20% of the vehicle produced in 2005 needed to be equipped with TPMS, and then it went up to 70% in 2006 to reach 100% in 2007. But let's say your vehicle is a 2005. Is that vehicle going to fit in that 20% that had TPMS, or will be in the 80% that did not? That can be, that's why you'll need to consider a third factor. You can also go in and look for the vehicle valve. If you look at the valve of the vehicle being serviced, typically a metal stem will have a TPMS sensor attached to it. Not all the time, but I would say most of the time. And if you have a rubber valve on that tire, seeing any of these types of valve, so first one here, the rubber valve with an extended brass neck. So when you put the valve cap on, you still see a little bit of brass between the valve cap and the rubber of the valve. That gives you a good cue that you have a TPMS sensor attached to it. And when you see those two types here, a little rubber ridge that runs across, or that rubber ridge here that is longitudinal throughout that valve stem, it's also a good indicator that you have a TPMS sensor attached at the end. But the best way, the most efficient way, and the quickest way, in my point of view, is really to look at the dash. When you turn the ignition on, all the lights in your dash will illuminate for a few seconds. That's called a bulb check. So what you want to do is you want to be able to identify that TPMS light in your dash. You turn the ignition on, all the light comes on, and then they will shut down after a few seconds. By identifying that you do see that TPMS light in that dash, this tells you the vehicle you're in is equipped with TPMS. Now, does that mean that you have a TPMS sensor in the wheel? Not necessarily, because you have different types of TPMS systems. And for this one, Tom is going to talk on the TPMS system for us.
Okay. So as Yanick mentioned, just because a vehicle is equipped with TPMS doesn't necessarily mean that it has a sensor in the tire. Although the majority of vehicles do have sensors in the tires. That is called a direct TPMS system. With a direct TPMS system, you actually have a sensor transmitter in the tire. And what that sensor will do is broadcast in data to the car's computer. Okay, so that sensor will send in the pressure that it sees in the tire, the temperature, and the individual ID number of that particular sensor. And that'll come into play later, the ID number. So when you have it installed, each of the sensors are going to broadcast a signal in. They're going to be transmitted through a radio signal to a receiver on the vehicle, and then that receiver will pass that data on to the vehicle's ECU. The vehicle's ECU will decide by the criteria that it receives whether you have an unsafe condition or a malfunction. So in the case of the graphic here, what you've got is 4 sensors. They're all talking to the computer, and one is reporting in at a pressure that is 25% below the placard value on the vehicle. That's the threshold that they consider unsafe. That's 25% below the placard value. So when that condition is presented, the ECU looks at it, and it's going to give you a solid light on the dashboard. So the solid TPMS light, and we'll talk a little bit about the 2 different conditions of that light. The solid light is telling you that the system is working normally and that one or more of your tires are broadcasting in a pressure that is below the placard value. So how do you know what the placard value is? All right, the placard value we'll get to. The solid light is going to tell you that you are 25% below. Your placard is going to be on the door sill of the vehicle, and that's going to give you some information. In of that, you're going to have your tire sizes, and you're going to have the recommended tire pressure. That tire pressure is twofold. It's going to give you the pressure that the manufacturer recommends for safe driving, proper handling, that type of criteria. And it's also giving you the target pressure that the computer is looking for in terms of a safe pressure and when the computer decides to give you a warning light. Okay, so the other state that you would get with this type of a system is a blinking light. And a blinking light is representative of a system malfunction. So in the case of the graphic, you've got the 4 sensors should be broadcasting in their data. When one of those 4 sensors is not reporting in, the computer knows that it's missing data. So it's going to give you a malfunction indicator lamp, which is going to be a blinking TPMS light. Okay, so that light is going to be blinking in the dash, and that's going to be indicating to you that there is something wrong in the system itself. Now, the other type of system that you should be aware of, because if you're working in a shop, this is definitely a situation that you could potentially see, is called an indirect system. An indirect system basically piggybacks off the function of the ABS brakes. So just a quick rundown on how an ABS brake system works is that the computer counts the revolutions of the tires, and it knows when one of them stops turning. If you're on ice or you lock up the brakes, the computer will release that brake to take away that skid condition. The indirect system piggybacks off of that. So what it will do is count the revolutions. There's a calculation the computer has of what is the correct speed the tire should be rotating when it is properly inflated. So when a tire begins to deflate, the overall diameter of that tire will get smaller. So at a given speed, it will rotate faster than a properly inflated tire would. When that condition exists, the computer is going to light up the solid TPMS light, and it's going to tell you that the pressure is low. You also, with that type of system, will have the same standard that if you have an issue systematically, a malfunction, you will have a blinking light. So it's going to work in the same way, but it determines the pressure through different means. So with that, we're going to go into our best practices checklist, which will give you the guidelines that you need to evaluate a TPMS system and diagnose it correctly. Back to you, Yanick.
Thank you, sir. Yes, checklist. So now that you know what TPMS is, you know the legislation that you need to abide to within the legislation, you know how to identify which vehicle has TPMS or not. This is a great tool that we have for you. This TPMS checklist, the best practices sheet, if you look on our website and you go into the download section, you're going to see that exact checklist directly on the best practices section. You'll have that for you to download. It's a checklist that will allow you to make that. Well, first of all, it will protect you and your shop from any liability, because this will help you identify any pre-existing damage that you'll have on the system itself, on the sensors, on the valve. And on top of that, you'll be able to allow all the proper diagnosis for the TPMS system. So if ever it comes to changing a TPMS sensor, there are certain steps that are that we've identified for you in order to make sure that you get all the information, the correct information to diagnose it properly, and of course, all the information you need if ever it comes down to replacing that sensor. So let's jump right into it, that checklist. The first item on the checklist is exactly what Tom just was mentioning. It's check the light. You have a solid TPMS light that is related to pressure, and you have your flashing TPMS light, which indicate a system malfunction. But when you get your solid TPMS light, if you point that, we strongly suggest that you just check on your list. So solid TPMS light is a pressure, a telltale, some people will say. What you want to do is do an ignition cycle. I'm going to get back to that point in just a second. Second point here, you want to check your placard value. So what is the recommended tire pressure that you see on that door placard, the driver door placard, and then you check with your tires with a manual stick gauge or a digital stick gauge to see if it match. You also want to check your full-size spare. If your vehicle is equipped with a full-size spare, there's a strong chance that you'll have a TPMS sensor in there. It might not be a tire that is touching the ground right now, but if there's a TPMS sensor in a spare tire, if that tire is low, it will trigger a TPMS light in your dash. And of course, you want to make sure that all the tires are inflated to the correct pressure. You want to do an ignition cycle. The reason for that is if you have a flashing TPMS light, which indicate a system malfunction, the flashing TPMS light will flash only for 60 to 90 seconds, and then it remains solid. 60 seconds can go pretty fast. You just get into the vehicle, adjust the seats, turn on the AC or heating, depending on where you are, and your 60 minutes is already gone. You look at your dash, all you see is this solid TPMS light. So if you're seeing the light, is it really solid? And that is the question. Is it really solid, or is the solid light is hiding a flashing TPMS light where you were just looking at the dash 60 seconds a little too late? So for that, what you want to do is turn the ignition off, do another ignition cycle with a key or your push button, and then you'll see if that light is flashing. If it's solid, you know you need to check for pressure. If it's flashing, well, you'll need to do a full system diagnostics. That is the first point on our list. You want to make sure that you do that before you put your car in, before you lift those tires from the ground, and write it down on your work order, because you know how it is. You don't want to end up with the problem if the customer comes in for just tire service, and as you turn on, you see that TPMS light. Before going any further, you want to write this down on the piece on your work order as it was already there when you took the car. Second item on our list is check the valve. I'm sure you guys servicing tires today, you know exactly what we mean. You were looking at those corroded valve stems, those cracked and dry out rubber stems. This will just break in your hand, and if you have not identified that pre-existing damage before you start working on the vehicle, you're going to end up with a problem, and you're going to end up with paying for that because you broke it. Check the valve. Before you lift those tires from the ground, check the valve stem. Do that two-finger twist test. Try to, if you cannot remove the valve cap with just 2 fingers, stop it right there. Don't go and reach out for this pair of pliers and then try to rip it out with your pliers. You're going to just break everything. It's going to just break everything in your hand. And if you have one of those one-piece fixed angle like this one here, if you break the valve stem, you need to replace the whole sensor. You need to replace the whole sensor unit because the valve stem is permanently attached to the sensor. So by breaking the valve stem, you're ending up on a full sensor replacement. So if you see that, if you see any corrosion on the valve stem, outside the valve stem, because your customer put on a vanity caps, you know, those skull caps, dice caps, chrome plated, with an aluminum stem, you get galvanic corrosion. In no time, everything is just bond together. You're trying to remove it. You can't. Everything just breaks in your hand. You want to identify that before starting the service. And sometimes the corrosion is not outside, but it's inside. Little trick for you. A nickel-plated valve core. Nickel-plated valve core can go either into a rubber stem or a metal stem. But a brass core, those brass core here can only go on your rubber stem. If you put a brass core into a metal stem, you'll get galvanic corrosion. You'll get galvanic corrosion, but inside the valve stem. Next time your customer will come to your shop, you're going to try to remove the valve core and everything will just break because it's all corroded, bonded together inside the valve stem, and you will not be able to, just to let the air out, you'll need to cut the whole valve stem off. All right? Always go with nickel plated. That way you know you can put them in either or. And the good news is if you carry a service kit in your shop, by making sure that you're always replacing those valve stem, by making sure that you're always servicing those valve stem. If you get those service kit with a nickel-plated core in it, you are just increasing that protection against galvanic corrosion. Please, all those valves, they need to be serviced. The rubber on the valve stem is not made to last as long as the life of 2 tires. So if you replace a tire, you need to replace the valve stem. It's a full unit. You just change the full stem. It usually comes all pre-assembled. The metal stem, the metal valve stem, it depends on what the design. Is it a 2-piece fixed angle? Is it a 1-piece adjustable angle? There's a different design, different types of metal stem. Always look it up by make, model, and year, and always ensure that you have enough service kit in stock to service those valve stems. So check the ignition, check the light at ignition, and check your valve because you want to be able to identify pre-existing damage on the valve stem, corrosion inside or outside the stem, if there's any missing valve cap, any vanity caps that you want to remove and tell your customer not to put that on the metal stem, cracked rubber, and make sure that you always have enough service kits. If you see any damage, write it down on your work order. Don't go any further. Go and see your customer or contact your customer. Say, I'm going to try to remove that valve cap or that valve core without breaking it, but just so you know, if you have a one-piece fixed angle, I might need to change the whole sensor unit. That's for our step 2. Step 3 is interesting because you can actually combine your step 2 and 3. Step 3 is check the sensor. You want to take your TPMS tool and bring it on a sidewall or tire to trigger and test that sensor. But as you're doing that, you can check like we have on the photo. So you have your sensor here, you have your tool, and you check the valve stem. You check the rubber valve. You'll see right away just by moving it in a circular move, you'll be able to see if there's any crack on that rubber stem. If you have a metal stem, you'll see it right away. All the corrosion, you see that that valve stem will give you a hard time. Then you want to write it down on your work order. Checking the sensor is very important, and I will never stress this enough. Test before you touch, TPMS check, pre-check, TPMS validation, pre-inspection, whatever you call it. You want to test the sensor that is already installed. The reason for that is it will let you know first, is the sensor still working? But on top of that, it helps you validate some of the key settings that you'll need to have on your TPMS tool. Customer comes to your shop and say, I have a 2018 Dodge Ram. Okay, I'm fine with that. You put that on your work order. Customer bought the vehicle in 2018, but the car is actually a 2017. So if you only base yourself on the information you have on your work order, you punch in 2018 Dodge Ram. When you'll try to scan the sensor, you will not get a reading. Therefore, you think the sensor is defective or needs to be replaced. The car is not a 2018, it's a 2017. Even though the car between 17 and 18 is the same design, the same trim level and all that, they've changed the sensor. From 17 to 18, the sensor is completely different. Always refer to the 10th digit of your VIN. Always go and check for the VIN. What is the 10th character of your VIN? And this way you'll be able to see what is the vehicle year. Don't rely on don't only rely on the manufacture date that you'll see sometimes under the hood or on the placard as well on the door pillar. This is a great example. Usually August and September 2011 would be a 2012 vehicle. So vehicle produced in September or August of 2011 would be a 2012. But in this case, we have a good example. Produced in August, but the vehicle is still a 2011. Tom and I have seen other vehicle where in March, it was already a production date for the year after. If you want to have the official year of the vehicle, model year, always look at the 10 digit of your VIN. And this is what you'll want to set on your tool in order to scan or read what's the sensor in it. On top of that, some vehicle will also ask you for a qualifier. Some of you may already have a TPMS tool. You know exactly what I'm talking about. When you're looking up a vehicle, you enter make, model, and year, and then it asks you for something else. Is it 315 or 433? Is it U.S. made or Japan made? Is it high line or low line? How can you know? You can't really know just by looking at the tire. What you need to do is test. You need to scan that sensor. So you want to be able to choose the first one on the list, scan the sensor. If you're not getting a response, test again with the other line that you have in order to identify. If ever you need to replace the sensor, then you'll know exactly which one you need to program it to. So check the sensor, always validate with the 10-digit of your VIN, and check for qualifiers. That is the third item on the checklist. Again, you want to write everything down on your work order. If the customer only comes, 2 weeks, 2 days later to do the service, to do the sensor replacement, you'll have everything written down on the work order that you can refer to. The fourth item on the list is check for DTCs. What I mean by DTCs is diagnostic trouble codes. Very important, especially if your car comes in with a flashing TPMS light. Flashing TPMS light is a system malfunction. Sorry for that. And I got a scenario recently. I'm just going to share that with you very quickly. You'll get the picture. You'll get the big picture out of it. Customer comes into the shop. The light is flashing. The technician does a quick TPMS check, scans all 4 sensors. The front left tire is the sensor is not responding. All right, we need to change the sensor. Change the sensor. The light goes off. Customer is happy. Customer goes home. Everyone's happy. Customer comes back the very next day, and the light is still flashing. He's not happy because he thinks you didn't do a good job. You scan the sensor again, and now it's the rear right that is not working. Customer is asking you, why didn't you check that? Why didn't you tell me that yesterday when I was here? The fact is when the technician tested the sensor, it was working fine yesterday, but now it's not working. When your battery are just on the edge of failing, you will get a mixed message on that. It might be working. You let the car sit for 15 minutes in the parking. You check, work fine. As you drive and it's constantly transmitting, then the sensor starts to fail. The good news is the vehicle computer will register all that. The vehicle computer will keep a record of every time you have a sensor failing. So if that technician would have connected the tool to the OBD, the tool will tell them, well, you actually have 3 DTCs in there. You have 3 diagnostic trouble codes that identify that 3 sensors were failing on that vehicle. You changed only 1 yesterday. You need to change a second one today. Why not just do that in one time? There will be some shop that say every time you have 1 failing, change all 4. You got to be careful. Check your DTCs first. This is the most efficient way to identify if there's any other sensor failing before starting to replace the whole package or the whole sensor in the vehicle. All right. Check the light at ignition. Check the valve for pre-existing damage. Check your sensor. Test your sensor. Check for DTCs. And the last one is the one, in my point of view, the most overlooked report. Put everything on your work order. You want to communicate that to your customer. And most of the tools that you'll find on the market today, they all have that reporting feature. Some of them you'll need to connect your tool to a computer with a USB cable. Some are Wi-Fi connected to a computer, or some will have a printer already integrated to a little cradle, Bluetooth to another computer. These little report that comes with the software you install to update your tool, this is pure gold. You get that, you print that, you show that to your customer every time he comes in for tire service. It will show your customer, it proves to your customer, tire is not just rubber anymore. It's not just plain old rubber. There's piece of technology in there that needs to be serviced, that needs to be diagnosed. And tire changeover are so much easier when you do those reports. Print out a report, ready to go. You tell your customer when he comes back, you have all the IDs, all the sensor position in there. Checklist, check it on our website. Next item on our agenda, once you know that you need to change a sensor, you did your diagnostics, you know you need to change a sensor, you need to choose which type of sensor you're going to use. And Tom is the perfect one to tell you more about that.
All right, thank you, Yanick. So once you've gone through your checklist and once you've determined that you do have a sensor that's failing and you have to replace it, you have options. There's a lot of different types of sensors on the market, so we'll talk about a couple different types and go over what the differences are between them and how they operate. So what you've got are three main types of sensors that are on the market. The first thing you want to know about choosing a sensor for a vehicle is that the sensor broadcasts the right information. So regardless of what type that we're going to talk about, the main point of the sensor is that it has to transfer the data from the tire, and it has to do that in a language that the vehicle understands. Okay, so the code that a General Motors vehicle is looking for is not the same code that a Ford vehicle is looking for. Those types, they're going to say different things, even though they're performing the same function. The information they send and the way they do it isn't exactly the same. So the first and foremost criteria for choosing a sensor is to make sure that that sensor sends the right information for the vehicle that you put it in. So that's kind of like language. The sensor has to speak the right language for the vehicle to understand it. So the first type of sensor that we're going to talk about is called an OE replacement. That type of sensor is a pre-programmed sensor. It is intended to duplicate the OE sensor in fit, form, and function. It is pre-programmed with one code, which means that you can't change that code. You can't alter it in any way. It's going to work with the vehicles that correspond to that particular code. The advantage to this type of sensor is that it works out of the box. There isn't any function that you have to do with the sensor itself. The disadvantage is that the application band that it works with is going to be relatively small because the code that it's broadcasting is only going to work with the cars that are compatible with that particular code. Okay? So while it's a little simpler in the fact that you don't have to program it or do any work with it, it's going to work with a very narrow band of vehicles. For that type of a sensor, what you're going to be looking at to cover 99% of the market is about 80-plus part numbers. Because of the fact that each sensor is going to have one code and it's going to have one band of applications, you would need to have about 80 different part numbers available to you to cover 99% of the market that you would typically see. So that's a little bit of the pros and the cons on an OE replacement. Now, the second type that we'll talk about is called a multi-application sensor. So this works kind of like the OE sensor in the sense that it is preloaded when you get it. It works right out of the box. You don't have to do any changes to it. And basically the premise is that you put multiple protocols on it, whereas the OE replacement type only has one. The multi-application will have several. So those codes will broadcast repeatedly when the sensor is in the tire. Each of the codes that it broadcasts is going to correspond to a list of applicable vehicles. So again, you don't have to do any function to the sensor itself. It works out of the box, and it does widen, the umbrella of coverage that it will give you, but you would still have to have probably 15 plus different independent part numbers to get to that 99% coverage that you're trying to achieve. So the last type, and our favorite type, is a programmable sensor. So this type of sensor, when you get it out of the box, it does not function. It is a blank sensor, so it's a writable. The disadvantage to that is that you have a process to program it, which we'll go over. But the overwhelming advantage to it is you can put any code on it that your scan tool can provide. So you can have one single part number that can cover 99% of the market. So basically they come out of the box and they're, think of it like a blank CD or a blank tape, something along that line. It's just a writable blank. And you use your scan tool, which has an index of all the codes for all the different vehicles. So the scan tool will load the applicable code to the sensor that you've chosen based on your make, your model, and your year, and the specific qualifiers that you've used. So the tool will load the sensor, and then once the sensor has the code on it, it will work with the vehicles that respond to that code. Another really great advantage to this type of sensor is that it is rewritable. So if the application changes, if you didn't need it for that car, you can simply rewrite the code and you can use that sensor on a different application. Another really good advantage to this type is that the hardware never goes obsolete. It's effectively future-proofed. So the hardware in the sensor itself can be used for codes that haven't even been released yet. So as long as your scan tool is kept up to date, and as long as you keep adding the codes to it, you can keep using the same hardware. And that goes, again, for vehicles that haven't even been released yet. So it's a very versatile type of product as opposed to the other two in terms of changing codes. We'll go over in a little bit how you can copy an ID from an existing sensor. So the flexibility of the programmable sensor really is an advantage when you're working in the shop and seeing different situations. So of those three types, the OE replacements, the multi-applications, and the programmable types, Schrader does provide two of those three. We have a full line of OER replacements, as we are a large OE supplier. So we have a full line of OE replacement type sensors, and we do have our Easy Sensor line, which is available in several different mechanical packages for the various applications that you would see. So that is a little bit on the different types of sensors. And now we're going to talk a little bit about how to program them and what the difference is between programming a sensor and training or retraining a vehicle where you sync them up. So for that, we're going to go back to Mr. Yanick.
Yes, sir. Thank you. All right, programming versus relearning. So with our checklist, you know that you need to replace your sensor, and you've identified that the programmable sensor is the one for you. Only one part number to keep in stock. Like Tom mentioned, the hardware will never expire because you update your tool constantly, and you'll be able to program sensors for a vehicle that, you know, will come up just in the future. So with that, so what you want to do is you have your sensor, but straight out of the box, the sensor is blank. It doesn't communicate anything. It will not transmit any signal. You will need to take a TPMS tool to program TPMS programming tool, a compatible TPMS programming tool to upload. So you're taking the code for a specific make, model, and year from the tool, and you're uploading it. You're transferring it to your sensor in order to have the sensor ready to transmit the correct data, the correct language to use in order to communicate with your vehicle. That process is called programming. You need it, you know, the name kind of says it. It's a programmable sensor, so you need to program it with a compatible TPMS programming tool before installing it in the sensor. We recommend that you do that before installing it in the sensor. Even though it is wireless, you could technically do it through the sidewall. Our recommendation is to always do it before installation. But once you have everything in there, once you have your sensor programmed, you also need to pair. You also need to sync the sensor. It's like pairing your phone, your Bluetooth with your car, or pairing your phone Bluetooth with a Bluetooth speaker. The reason for that, and let me give you just a little background here. We have two vehicles, exactly the same make, model, and year. It's only the color is different. And we all agree that the TPMS sensor in the blue car is the exact same part number that you'll find in the TPMS sensor in the gray car. These sensors can communicate up to 30 feet away. So if the blue car has a flat tire, how come you don't have a TPMS light that comes on the gray vehicle? Reason for that is every sensor has its own unique ID. It's the sensor ID. So as you're driving, each sensor will be communicating tire pressure, tire temperature, and sensor ID. These four IDs are saved on the vehicle computer. Therefore, the vehicle knows that these are the four sensors he needs to monitor the pressure with. Any signal coming from any other vehicle is automatically discarded, automatically ignored, because The sensor the vehicle says these are the only 4 sensor, or 5 if you have a full-size spare. These are the only sensor that I am concentrating in, that I am focused on. The trick is when you have one sensor that goes bad, you're replacing it with a new sensor here. But that new sensor has a different ID. The sensor ID is different. Therefore, a car will ignore that new sensor ID. You need to pair, you need to create that virtual handshake between the sensor and the vehicle. This operation is called the relearn. Programming and relearning, 2 different operations. You need to program before installing it in the wheel and tire. Once you have everything installed on the car, you need to relearn. Relearning procedure is vehicle specific. Every brand has its own way of doing things. Every car manufacturer has a different process, and sometimes even within the same vehicle manufacturer brand, you'll have some tweaks and different variant of a relearn procedure. There's no standards, but the good news for you is everything is in your tool. All the process, and this is, I have not seen a tool in the market that does not give you the relearn procedure for the vehicle once you've selected the right vehicle on your tool. You'll have everything documented in there directly on your tool. When you're ready to do your relearn, the first thing that pops up, all the procedure is there step by step. And here's one for you. You see that little triangle here? You see that little arrow at the bottom of that screen? This is telling you there's more information. Guys, I'm begging you, please read the procedure. Read the procedure completely. Take notes if you have to. You would not believe the number of calls we're getting at our 1-800 tech support on technician that is going through the relearn, and they're asking how come it doesn't work, but they have not done the relearn completely. Do the full relearn and click on that down arrow to see if there's not a special trick, a special step that you need to do in order to have that relearn to be fully completed. Overall, there's 3 types of relearn. 3, not 3, 3. Auto relearn, stationary, and OBD. Let's go with them quickly. The time goes so fast. 38% of the vehicle in operation in North America works on auto relearn. Auto relearn, super easy, drive the vehicle. Drive the vehicle a certain number of minutes over a certain speed. What's important to remember is that it needs to be an uninterrupted driving. How it works is the vehicle will be receiving the signal from these 4 sensors, and since the vehicle will be waiting for, let's say, 15 minutes, those 4 sensors that have been communicating with the vehicle on a steady base and always with the same signal strength, the vehicle will then understand, okay, well, these are the 4 sensor ID that I need to saved in the computer as the sensor on our install. Uninterrupted driving. If the procedure says 15 minutes over 15 miles per hour, you drive 10 minutes and then you stop at a red light, you'll need to redo that relearn process again. 15 minutes over 15 miles per hour. Most of the tool will tell in the procedure highway driving recommended. This way you know that you'll be driving 15 minutes nonstop. Slowing down, on some vehicles, slowing down under that 15 miles per hour will also cause the relearn process to not complete, to be incomplete, and you'll need to redo the full thing. Newer vehicle, you'll have more and more of these on the auto relearn. Some will also ask you to have the sensor on parking mode. So leave the vehicle parked for 15 minutes, key off, and you're making sure that and then you do your drive 15 minutes over 15 miles per hour. It's not always 15 minutes. It's not always 15 miles per hour. Always look at your procedure. Stationary relearn. my personal favorite, because you get a signal that the car is telling you, is giving you a cue that the relearn works. How it works is you need to first put the vehicle on the relearn mode. That, follow the step by step. Some you need to press on the brake, cycle the key. Some it's on the dash. Some it's on the key fob. You need to press, hold, and lock and unlock for 5 seconds. You all have different process. Some it's, in the instrument cluster, and you need to press set. Read your procedure. Read your procedure to make sure. But what you're looking for is you're looking for your vehicle to be to transfer into a learn mode or into a relearn mode. When that happens, you'll have a horn chirp. The vehicle will give you a cue. Okay, I'm ready to receive new sensor ID. You get your horn chirp. You take your tool and you activate all 4 sensors. With your tool, you just come in and activate all 4. Every time you activate the sensor, the tool also gives you a cue that the relearn worked, the horn chirp, telling you, I've accepted this new ID. Once you have all that, usually you'll have a double horn chirp, or you get a flasher that blinks telling you that the relearn is complete. In the dash, you'll have a little message, learning completed, training completed. Your sensor, you'll always, then your procedure is complete. There's always an order: left front, right rear. I've seen one that uses a different order, so always rely on that procedure. And there's a time limit. If you start by the first tire and then it takes you 15 minutes to go to the second tire, it's not going to work. You need to scan all 4 within a certain time limit. Next one quickly, we're already at 51 minutes. OBD Relearn. OBD Relearn, the tool does everything for you. You scan all 4 sensors with your tool. You take your tool, connect the OBD port to the vehicle, and the tool then uploads those sensor ID to the vehicle's computer. It might seem super easy like that, but these are actually, depending on the vehicle, it can be a little tricky. And this is why you need to check on that relearn procedure. Some will ask you to scan the sensor a second time after you've uploaded. Some will ask you to drive. Some will ask you to turn the ignition on, the engine on, and then scan a third time. Some will tell you leave the tool connected, but go activate all 4 sensors again. Like I said, there's no standards, okay? It can get a little tricky. You'll get some Toyotas and Suzuki that sometimes they have a very precise process that you need to follow step by step. If you skip one step, it's not going to work. You need to redo the whole thing again. Always rely on the procedure on your tool. All this to say, sometimes you need to do a relearn even though you haven't changed the sensor. Vehicles that are equipped with a pressure by location like this here, it tells you which pressure is in which tire. If you do a tire rotation, let me just back up one slide on this one here. When you do a tire rotation and you do not perform a relearn, you're ending up with a situation where the pressure by location is not giving you the right info. You've put your rear one in the front in the back. Now this one is giving you a flat tire, but on the pressure by location, it tells you that it's your rear left that is low. So the driver will go out, check at the rear left, tire is fine, but it's actually this one that is flat. Always do a tire relearn, TPMS relearn when you do a tire rotation. I'm sorry, Tom, took a little too much time on this one. Next one on our agenda, now that you know how to replace a sensor, how to relearn, I'm sure you guys are dying to know how you can do all this without doing a relearn. TPMS Tom.
Yep. Yanick went through a lot of detail there, and I'm going to tell you how to get around it. So not every vehicle is hard to relearn. So this advantage doesn't work in every situation, but in certain vehicles with certain procedures and little asterisks that they put on it, being able to avoid the relearn in some cases can be invaluable. So what if when you actually change a sensor, rather than having to change the ID like we're looking at here in the graphic, we're showing where if you're going to go ahead and change a sensor, you're going to have to change an ID, and then you're going to have to go through your relearn. Well, if you're in a situation where possibly you broke a sensor when you were changing a tire, and the stem is broken so you can't reuse it, but the sensor itself will still broadcast. So electrically, it actually still works. What you can do is use your scan tool to scan that sensor, and that way when you scan it, it will grab the ID number of that sensor, and you can take that same ID and you can write it onto the new programmable sensor that you're installing. So when you reassemble it and when you go through everything, the vehicle is still looking at the same 4 ID numbers that it was looking at before. So the computer doesn't know you made a change. Therefore, you don't have to go through the retrain process. And again, depending on the vehicle, that is a really, really big advantage on some, because some of the manufacturers on certain vehicles have made that process less than ideal for going through. So being able to copy an ID number in certain cases can really, really be an advantage to you. So that way you can avoid all of the scenarios that Mr. Yanick just described to you. Okay, so one of the things that we always like to do at the end of our presentations is to provide all of our contact information. We are available to you as a resource Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., Saturday, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Our phone number is 800-288-1804. A great rule of thumb, if you're going through any of these exercises and you spend more than 10 to 15 minutes trying to solve a problem, call the 800 number. Our guys listen to this all the time, and many, many times we can get you out of the trouble you're in just a short phone call. So never hesitate to use the 800 number and ask questions, sensor types, applications, particularly retrains if you're having an issue with the vehicle. Anything along that line, give us a call. We're here to help.
All right. Oops, I was on mute. Thank you, Tom. We are now ready for some questions and answers. Tom, you can join me. Oh, no, the other way? Okay. We're ready for questions.
Awesome. Well, thank you both for that presentation. We appreciate it. And in just a few moments, we will begin our Q&A portion of the webinar. I don't think we'll be able to get through all the questions, but before we do that, I'd like to ask everyone to please take a few moments to fill out our survey. The survey should be popping up on your screen momentarily. If it doesn't launch, you can click the survey icon in your toolbar at the bottom. So we have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions. So gentlemen, we have a question here. How can I test an easy sensor before installation?
Okay, so an easy sensor, when you take it out of the box, you can't actually scan it. You can take a tool and you can set it to your make, model, and year that you're going to be putting the sensor on. But when you scan it, there isn't actually a code on it to read, so it's not going to respond. The way that you would actually test a sensor, which is the way we would recommend you do it, is you want to program the sensor using your tool. The tool will upload the ID number to it. It will upload the communication information that it needs for the particular vehicle that you've chosen. The tool will actually test the sensor when it's complete. So it uploads all the data to it, and then its last instruction is to make the sensor broadcast back. So it'll confirm and tell you that it was programmed successfully. So that's the way that you would actually test an easy sensor specifically before you put it in, as opposed to like an OE type where you could actually trigger it, because that already has a code in it. So you could trigger that and get a response. An easy will not work right out of the box, but the way you would go about it is to program it and then test it.
Okay, and then just time for one more question. What tool besides a Schrader tool can program an easy sensor?
That's a very good question. There's a lot of tools. There's over 50-something different tool brands and models that can program Easy Sensor. On our website, there is a full list. If you buy an Easy Sensor today, I looking at this, I have one handy. Inside the box, there's a little box insert. If you unfold everything, a full list of the compatible TPMS program and tool is in there. There are very few tools on the market right now that cannot program Easy Sensor, but always check on that list on our website or give us a call. Give us a call on 1-800 number. We'll tell you exactly if your tool can do it or not. Sometimes just a little software update will enable that tool to program our sensor.
Got it. Okay, awesome. Well, gentlemen, that's all the time we have for our Q&A session. I'd like to remind our audience that a recording of this webinar will be available on the Tire Review, Tomorrow's Technician, and Shop Owner brand websites in the next few days. So feel free to log into it and view it again, or encourage colleagues to view it. Also, look for a follow-up email directing you to the on-demand version of the webinar. This concludes our webinar for today. Thanks so much for your time and have a nice day.